The world is watching the largest submarine ever built, slowly moving through the Caribbean Sea on its way to join the Pacific Fleet. This giant, over 361 feet long, is covered in steel armor and armed with the most powerful 8-inch guns. Additionally, it has its own aircraft hangar, making it truly unique of its kind. It was created with a single purpose: to completely change the concept of naval warfare. This submarine was meant to become a hunter of enemy ships, like a ghost that appears suddenly, delivers a devastating strike, and then disappears instantly into the depths of the ocean. Such a vessel could appear unexpectedly, strike the enemy with terrifying force, and then vanish without a trace, like a phantom. It was named Surcouf, after the French privateer Robert Surcouf, a famous 18th century maritime pirate. However, despite its power and intimidating size, in February 1942, this giant disappeared forever from the seas. It, along with its crew of 130 men, simply vanished without a trace. No distress signals, no sunken wreckage. Nothing that could tell its fate. To this day, its disappearance remains one of the most mysterious chapters of World War II, shrouded in secrecy and possibly hiding some of the darkest secrets of that conflict. After the end of World War I, the victorious powers decided that such an arms race at sea, which nearly led to a global catastrophe, would not happen again. As a result, the Washington Naval Treaty was signed in 1922, imposing strict limitations on the construction of warships. This treaty restricted the size of battleships and their armament, setting limits on displacement and gun caliber. Later in 1930, the London Naval Treaty was signed, which went even further. It limited the construction of cruisers and established quotas for each major naval power. However, these carefully negotiated agreements included one important exception: submarines. The diplomats involved in drafting these treaties could not reach a consensus regarding submarines. Britain, still remembering how its naval strength was nearly crippled by a near-starvation blockade and stubborn battles with German U-boats, insisted on a complete ban on submarine construction. France, with its extensive colonial empire, demanded permission to build submarines with a total displacement of up to 90,000 tons. Ultimately, the issue remained unresolved, and submarines largely remained outside the restrictions of the treaties. For French naval strategists, this became a real opportunity. If they could not build new battleships or large cruisers, they decided to create something entirely new: a submarine with the firepower of a cruiser. In 1926, they found a suitable name for their ambitious project. They decided to name it after Robert Surcouf, a French privateer and pirate of the 18th century who between 1795 and 1809 became one of France's most successful corsairs. During his career, he captured more than 40 merchant ships in the Indian Ocean, including even a vessel belonging to the East India Company, the ship Kent, in a legendary confrontation near India. His name became a symbol of French naval strength and the ability to strike at enemy trade routes. The new submarine was meant to continue this glorious tradition, embody France's determination to demonstrate its power even beyond its maritime borders, despite the restrictions imposed by international treaties. As a result, from the shipyard, these enormous weapon systems, each weighing over 22 tons, were built with a single purpose: to launch heavy shells weighing 270 pounds over a distance exceeding 16 miles. These powerful guns were intended to deliver a decisive blow to the enemy, and their design was characterized by high precision and reliability. Behind the command tower, which served as the control center of the submarine, was a specially equipped hangar. It housed a Besson MB-411 hydroplane, a small, lightweight, and highly maneuverable aircraft designed for reconnaissance and target detection beyond the horizon. Thanks to this, the vessel gained a unique capability for the first time among submarines, not only to navigate underwater, but also to conduct aerial reconnaissance, radically expanding its combat potential. Moreover, the submarine's armament was as impressive as its aviation component. It had a total of 10 torpedo tubes, 4 in the bow with a diameter of 22 inches, and 6 more located in rotating launchers on the deck. This allowed it to fire from multiple directions simultaneously, creating a threat to enemy ships at any range and from any angle. Additionally, the vessel carried a motorboat intended for landing or capture operations, as well as special cameras and detention facilities capable of holding up to 40 enemy prisoners. Such dimensions and technical equipment made this submarine not just a combat vessel, but essentially a small warship capable of performing a variety of missions. Its enormous fuel tanks provided unprecedented range, up to 10,000 nautical miles without refueling, allowing for extended patrols of up to 90 days. The crew, consisting of 118 officers and sailors, made it resemble more a miniature warship than a traditional submarine. Part 3 of 11. In theory, such a vessel could silently patrol shipping routes around the world, appear where needed, open fire on cargo ships with heavy artillery, capture ghost ships, and quickly disappear underwater before the enemy could react. When this submarine was commissioned in the year 2130, it seemed a real breakthrough in military technology. However, despite its impressive specifications and ideas, implementing everything as planned proved much more difficult. During its first 5 years of service, Surcouf mainly conducted demonstration missions, so-called show of flag patrols aimed at boosting France's prestige in its colonies. During this time, it traveled over 16,000 miles, but numerous mechanical issues emerged during these voyages, preventing it from fully realizing its potential. Its enormous size and complex construction made it slow to submerge, a process necessary for stealthy movement, which became a serious vulnerability in the era of air power. Its guns, positioned so low in the water, had an actual combat radius of only about 7.5 miles, whereas their theoretical range was much greater. At the same time, the complex internal mechanical systems required constant maintenance and attention, and in stormy weather when the sea was very rough, the submarine rocked heavily and acid could leak from the batteries, creating dangerous situations inside. While the French fleet struggled to manage this complex and costly vessel, plans to build 2 of its sisters, similar in design and armament, were quietly canceled to avoid additional expenses and risks. When World War II began in September 1939, Surcouf was in the French Antilles. It immediately headed back to France, but technical malfunctions and issues persisted. On July 3rd, it launched Operation Catapult, a harsh and decisive strike against the French Navy carried out without warning. On that day, British ships opened fire on French vessels in North Africa, delivering powerful salvos that resulted in the death of over 1,200 French sailors. At the same time, Prime Minister Churchill hoped that Captain Martin and his crew could be convincingly persuaded to join the Free France movement, which was based in London under the leadership of General Charles de Gaulle. This meant that the Surcouf submarine would continue serving the Allies rather than switching to the Axis side. However, given that Captain Martin's response remained uncertain, the British were unwilling to take risks. At 04:15 a.m., 3 motorboats approached the submarine, carrying about 60 men, amphibious troops prepared for capture. The operation was led by Captain Dennis Lofty Sprague from the HMS Thames. Part 4 of 11. The assault team consisted of Royal Navy Marines armed with rifles and bayonets, as well as submarine crews equipped with pistols and wooden clubs. The French were prepared for this moment in advance. Captain Martin ordered all hatches to be sealed except for one. At this single entrance, 2 armed sentries stood guard. When the boats approached, one of the French guards noticed them and, in despair, rushed to the opening hatch, knocking on the hull to alert his comrades below. Lieutenant Francis Talbot was the first to board, but he found that the hatch had slammed shut and he was locked outside. However, during preliminary reconnaissance, he had noticed that the hatches of the Surcouf could be opened from the outside by rescue divers. Within minutes, he managed to open the hatch in the conning tower, and British commandos stormed inside. Captain Sprague gathered the French officers in the command cabin and, according to his account, read them a letter from French Admiral Cole, in which he supposedly urged them to join the Free France movement. In reality, Captain Martin doubted the authenticity of this letter and demanded a meeting with Cole himself to verify its truth. Sprague allowed Captain Martin to leave, though he knew the letter was a forgery, and left command in the hands of Junior Captain P7. Soon the situation began to escalate. When Sprague noticed P7 passing a secret note instructing to cut off the power and damage the ship, he sent a junior officer after him, who caught up and knocked him unconscious with a hammer. During the brief period when the lights on Surcouf were out, Engineer Yves Daniel sneaked into his compartment to destroy technical documentation, while Surgeon Lenny Stour stood guard. Sprague could no longer tolerate it and ordered all French officers to leave the submarine. Captain Pi 7 categorically refused and ran to his cabin for a pistol. Lieutenant Cresson boldly declared he would not leave the submarine until Captain Martin returned. The conflict became inevitable. Sprague, holding a revolver in his hand, stood up and warned Cresson in French that he would open fire if the crew did not leave the ship. The weapons of Lieutenant Griffiths and Sailor William Hitt were also at the ready. Chief Albert Webb received orders to aim his Lee Enfield rifle at the French officers, with its 17-inch bayonet gleaming brightly. When Sprague ordered Webb to shoot Cresson, the French officers froze. On that fateful day, when a brutal and bloody scene unfolded aboard the submarine, everything seemed like a terrible nightmare. Quietly, calmly, as if on the eve of tragedy, one of the crew members took a .32 caliber pistol from his gun cabinet and began shooting. The first shot struck Captain Sprague in the neck, collarbone, and abdomen, turning him into a victim of this bloody fight. At the same moment, Lieutenant Griffiths was wounded in the arm, thigh, and liver, which significantly complicated the situation. In response to such fierce gunfire, the chief ship's petty officer Mott opened fire in return and hit the attacker, Buigeot, in the chest. In the adjacent cabin, Surgeon Lenny Stour quickly pulled out his magazine and began shooting at leading seaman Webb, firing 7 rounds. These bullets passed through the British sailor and struck the second man, Boatswain Hitt, who was standing behind. After such a fierce and bloody exchange of fire, an oppressive silence settled over the submarine. Everything seemed frozen in tension, as if death itself had paused for a moment. The cost of this battle was horrifying. Captain Sprague died from his wounds the next day, and Lieutenant Griffiths just a day later. Among the fallen were also leading seaman Webb and engineer Daniel, who succumbed to their injuries. The surviving French sailors were forced to march to internment camps, and most of them decided to return to their homeland, France. As a result of this bloody clash, the British gained a valuable weapon, the submarine, but without its crew, the only people who knew all its complex systems and could operate its features. Without commanders capable of understanding its intricacies, the future of Surcouf appeared highly uncertain. By August 1940, the British had completed repairs and upgrades to the vessel, after which they reluctantly handed it over to the Free French forces. However, only one officer remained from the original crew, Captain Georges Louis Blaison, who became the new commander of the submarine. The new crew was hastily assembled from French sailors who had fled to Britain, most of whom had never served on a submarine before, and certainly not on such a complex and multifunctional vessel as Surcouf. As a result of these rushed efforts, the ship was managed catastrophically. During its first dive in Scottish waters, the submarine lost control due to a gross mistake in ballasting tank filling. It sank too deep, exceeding the safe depth limit, before the crew could regain control. This incident was a stark example of incompetence and convinced Admiral Horton, commander of the British submarine forces, that Surcouf could not be trusted in combat. The disaster did not end there. During one of the training exercises, the crew mistakenly left the periscope hatch open, causing the submarine to flood itself. Seawater filled the batteries and released a dangerous chlorine gas. Some crew members were poisoned. Subsequently, due to the additional weight of the water, the submarine once again lost control and sank to a depth of over 300 feet, while the gun turret began filling with water. Commands were given to blow the ballast tanks to raise the submarine, but no one thought to close the vents in advance. Only luck saved the crew from death. The submarine did not sink completely, and all crew members remained alive. 15 sailors were severely punished for such mistakes, and several were hospitalized. The British officers aboard were outraged and dissatisfied. Lieutenant John Green reported that despite all their failures and difficulties, Surcouf remained a symbol of pride and hope for France, as well as an important element of the French naval fleet. During those years when the country was going through hard times, this submarine became a symbol of resistance and courage, even despite the constant challenges and setbacks it faced. Essentially, it was the last remaining symbol of the French naval forces, embodying the spirit of national pride for many. In December 1941, the commander of the French forces in exile, Admiral Émile Muselier, arrived aboard Surcouf at the port of Halifax. His intentions were bold and ambitious. He planned to carry out a series of decisive actions aimed at strengthening the influence of the Free French forces. That day, December 20th, the ship hoisted a distinctive Lorraine cross on its mast, replacing the traditional tricolor, and together with 3 corvettes from the Free French forces, it set sail. Their goal was to seize French territories on Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, a tiny archipelago located just 15 miles south of the coast of Newfoundland. These small islands held strategic importance, and control over them was crucial for both sides, vying for influence in the Atlantic. 4 days later, on the eve of Christmas, a small squadron entered St. Pierre's harbor. There, Muselier declared solemnly that these strategic islands were now under the control of the Free French forces, effectively overthrowing the Vichy government, which had previously governed the French territories. The coup was swift and bloodless, and the final decision was confirmed by a nationwide referendum in which about 900 people voted, with only 30 votes against. This result demonstrated the resolve and support of the French population, but also triggered a storm of political and diplomatic repercussions on the international stage. The reaction of the United States was extremely negative. Secretary of State Cordell Hull was furious, having just completed complex negotiations with the Vichy government that guaranteed the neutrality of French possessions in the Western Hemisphere. He believed his carefully crafted strategy had been destroyed and even resigned. However, President Franklin Roosevelt convinced him not to do so, as the situation required stability and restraint. At the same time, both leaders, Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill, were deeply dissatisfied with General de Gaulle's actions, who had conducted this risky and unauthorized raid without coordinating with the Allies. This incident marked a significant turning point. Relations between Free France and its allies reached their lowest point. Part 7 of 11. The British stopped sharing intelligence with de Gaulle, and the Americans viewed Surcouf with suspicion and distrust. The submarine itself, which was meant to symbolize French naval superiority and national pride, was now seen as a diplomatic embarrassment and a source of international problems. By January 1942, the global situation had changed even more. Japan had entered the war, and the situation in the Pacific was rapidly deteriorating. In response, it was decided to send Surcouf to the other side of the world. Its route was planned to go through the Panama Canal, then to the Pacific Ocean, into the Pacific region, and further to New Caledonia to help defend French colonies and territories in this strategic area. This was an incredibly ambitious mission for a submarine already suffering from mechanical issues and crewed by an inexperienced crew. Moreover, the vessel's technical condition was far from ideal. One of its main electric motors had failed, limiting its movement to just one propeller shaft. When it arrived at the Bermuda Islands on February 27th, Captain Blazin presented the Royal Navy authorities with a detailed list of urgent repairs needed to restore the ship. The list was very long and included numerous tasks requiring immediate attention. Experts estimated that it would take at least 3 months to complete all these repairs and bring the submarine back to operational condition. However, London had its own plans and timelines, which were much more rigid. It was decided that there would be no delays. Admiral Horton issued a clear order. Repairs must begin immediately, and no postponements were allowed. As a result, Surcouf was to depart for the Pacific without delay, regardless of how many problems arose along the way. Ready or not. On February 10th, a British naval liaison officer, Lieutenant Roger Burney, prepared a report that painted a very bleak picture of the crew's current state and the situation aboard. It stated that the morale of the crew had reached its lowest point since the submarine's commissioning, and conditions were worsening. Some sailors drank so heavily that they could barely perform their duties, posing a serious safety risk to the entire crew. Even more troubling was the fact that relations between the French sailors and their British controllers were deteriorating daily. The crew members, who were significantly fewer than the British specialists, now feared for their safety, as hostility and tension had escalated to such a degree that a real threat of conflict and violence loomed. Despite all these alarming signals, on February 22nd, Surcouf finally broke away from the Bermuda base and headed south toward the Panama Canal. Part 8 of 11. The massive submarine slowly left the port, black smoke billowing from its hull, a sign that only one of its engines was functioning properly. 6 days later, communication with the submarine was completely lost. No distress signal was received, and none of the command staff received any message of trouble. It soon became clear that the vessel, which was supposed to be revolutionary in the field of naval armaments, had disappeared from radar screens and the face chart as suddenly as if it had been erased from the face of the earth. On board the Surcouf were about 130 people, the entire crew, and all of them, as if in an instant, vanished without a trace. The official version of what happened seemed quite simple and logical. On the night of February 28th, the American cargo ship Thomson Lykes, sailing through the dark waters of the Caribbean Sea, spotted something unusual ahead. Officers on the bridge noticed that ahead was something large and dark, partially submerged. The ship's commander ordered a sharp turn to starboard to avoid a collision, but it was already too late. At 10:28 in the evening, Thomson Lykes collided with an object that its crew later described as a partially submerged object. An explosion ensued, and bright flames erupted on the water's surface. Several sailors reported hearing voices calling for help, in English, before the ship continued on its course and passed by the collision site. When Thomson Lykes failed to arrive at the scheduled port near the Panama Canal, it became clear that something very serious had happened. The initial assumption was that the American freighter had accidentally collided with a submarine and sank it. An investigation by Allied forces concluded that the massive submarine had been accidentally struck and sunk by an American ship, and the case was closed. However, when investigators began to examine the evidence more carefully, troubling questions arose that cast doubt on the official version. Most importantly were the mathematical calculations. The distance between the collision site and the Bermuda base was only 1,000. Despite extensive searches, not a single piece of debris or fragment of the vessel was found. Neither the bodies of the deceased nor any traces of the ship, while the crew of the Surcouf bridge, who should have been wearing life jackets, disappeared without a trace. The most mysterious aspect, which causes the greatest surprise, is the strange object that collided with Thomson Lykes. This object apparently exploded and ignited in flames, which is completely uncharacteristic for a diesel submarine. These unusual circumstances gave rise to many alternative theories. Some researchers pointed to recordings made by the American 6th Heavy Bomber Group, based in Panama. These recordings claimed that on the morning of February 20th, this group had launched an attack on a large submarine and sank it. There are reasons to believe that the vessel in question is specifically the Surcouf, which may have been damaged in a collision but still continued moving toward Panama until American aircraft mistakenly identified it as a German U-boat. At the same time, darker theories emerged suggesting deliberate sabotage. Could it be that British or American forces, angered by the Surcouf due to its unreliability or suspicions of betrayal by its crew, decided to destroy it? These assumptions are based only on circumstantial evidence, but are cause for concern. Admiral Kennedy Purvis, who was in the Bermuda Islands, clearly indicated that he wanted to get rid of this vessel, and Captain Blyson had heard alarming rumors that someone was planning to place explosive devices on the submarine. Some researchers pointed to mini LITPs, delayed action explosive devices that could be attached magnetically to the hull and set to explode after a certain period of movement. Others believed that sending the Surcouf through the most dangerous waters of the Caribbean without proper escort, along with the upcoming withdrawal of its British liaison officers, could all be part of a deliberate sabotage. Such a route, in their view, was inherently risky and endangered the crew's lives, as the Surcouf might not have returned. However, there is one theory that paints an even more dramatic picture of the vessel's final days, and its author is a man well acquainted with the submarine fleet. This is Captain Frederick Hallett, a retired U.S. Navy submarine expert. He spent many years studying declassified documents and concluded that the collision with the Thomson Lykes was not what it seemed. In his research, an astonishing version emerged. The Surcouf never intended to reach the Pacific Ocean. According to his theory, Captain Blyson and his crew, faced with an impossible task in a damaged ship, made a fateful decision. Instead of continuing a suicidal voyage into the Pacific, they decided to switch sides to Vichy, France, heading toward Martinique, where they could join their French comrades in arms and perhaps find spare parts and knowledge necessary to repair the submarine. Interestingly, 3 months after the incident with the Thompson Likes, on May 26, 1942, an American PBY Catalina amphibious aircraft attacked and apparently sank a large submarine off the coast of Martinique. The crew, including Lieutenant Edward Binning, reported seeing the largest submarine he had ever seen. She must have been over 300 feet long. The Surcouf was 361 feet in length. Even more interesting is what the crew noticed on the tower under the Cross of Lorraine, which had long been a symbol of Free France, representing hope and resistance during difficult years of the fight for freedom. But if the vessel in question had indeed switched to the Vichy side and changed its original status, the presence of such a mark could have served as an important means of identification for its crew. In a wartime environment where ships and submarines from different sides encounter each other at sea, a clear distinction between friendly and enemy vessels became absolutely essential. Therefore, the attacked submarine might have had some special markings to help determine its allegiance, especially if it had defected to the enemy or was hiding from pursuit. The attack on the nearly stationary submarine itself caused considerable surprise among observers. The speed of this vessel was estimated at only 5 knots. That is, it was moving very slowly, almost making no progress. Such minimal movement could indicate that the submarine was caught off guard and did not expect an attack. At the moment of the attack, the depth charges dropped from torpedo tubes or minesweepers hit their target precisely. They were positioned so that one exploded directly in the middle of the vessel and the other on the opposite side, forming what was called a shashlik. Witnesses reported seeing the bow of the submarine emerge from the water afterward, as if trying to shed its burden. Then the vessel suddenly listed and disappeared into the depths, submerging into the water at a depth of about 4,650 feet. It is particularly interesting that in this area, for more than a week, the German submarine U-69 was waiting for a meeting, presumably to connect with another vessel and continue its perilous crossing of the Atlantic. When no other ship appeared, U-69 apparently decided to leave the area and set out alone. This happened on June 1st, after the longest patrol in the submarine service history. According to one hypothesis, this is exactly how it happened. The submarine Surcouf managed to reach Martinique, where it hid and remained in concealment for 3 months. There it possibly underwent repairs or waited for the right moment for a second mission, under the protection of German U-boats that escorted it through the dangerous waters of the Atlantic. At that time, on May 26th, it was trying to meet with U-69 to cross the open sea together, risking an ambush or attack. For Lieutenant Binning, the commander, this battle was a real success. He was awarded the Navy Cross for allegedly sinking a German submarine, an achievement considered a great feat. However, after decades of research into German archives, it was revealed that on that day, no U-boat UMANIS-69 was lost without a trace, and there was no data indicating the loss of any submarines at that time. The submarine that disappeared, destroyed by Binning, thus remained in history as a mysterious vessel vanished without a trace, just like Surcouf itself. A legendary French ship long considered an impeccable symbol of French naval superiority. If we accept Hallett's theory, it can be hypothesized that Surcouf's final battle did not end with a collision with a cargo ship or a typical maritime accident. Perhaps it was a desperate last stand against American bombers, which caught her in waters where she was hiding. Indeed, it is possible that the submarine was destroyed not by accident, but by the will of the Allies, who, despite all efforts, eliminated her in the very waters where she sought refuge. And perhaps this is exactly what happened, not as a result of a tragic collision, but as an act of betrayal or a tragic misunderstanding.